Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Battle for Azeroth video. So the expansion has been in testing for a decent chunk of time. 4 of the expansion's 6 leveling zones are now implemented, a few of the dungeons are in, and we've also been able to sample the game's new island exploration system, which is one of the major things they wanted to bring to the game. So today I'm going to be summing up my experiences from the alpha now that I've completed all of the content that's currently on offer. Now, while this is not a complete look at the expansion by any means, the leveling dungeons and the leveling zones, they do tell us a lot. Not only about our first week in the expansion and what that will feel like, but also they give us, a great look at the world we're going to be spending a hell of a lot of time in. Now, the theme for Battle for Azeroth is also something that's quite different from what we've seen in the past, and indeed having such a large continent split, that's also pretty much unheard of in a World of Warcraft expansion, with there really being, a decently fiery discussion about the quality of each faction's content. So we're going to be covering pretty much all of that today. Let's begin today's video though with the continents themselves. What has struck me the most is how different they are, almost as if they were created by different teams. Now, why is this? Well, the overall styles, in my view, they couldn't be further apart, and I don't mean in terms of the art style at all. I mean this in terms of the design language of the zones. Now, one of the major criticisms of World of Warcraft Legion was that it felt rather theme park-like. The zones didn't have a great flow into each other, and they were all very dense. Basically, it felt a little bit over-designed, like a bunch of quest hubs connected together. What we see in Battle for Azeroth is 2 continents which have 2 very different responses to this criticism, of course in my opinion. Kul Tiras, more than any other continent, feels like one big, cohesive area. The zones flow into each other extremely naturally, and it's all just tied together very well. How is this? So let's just break it down. Kul Tiras is basically 3 islands around a central lake. This is then surrounded by loads of mountain ranges, and most of the playable area is kind of just in that surrounding landscape. Now, these 3 islands are connected by bridges, a network of rowboats, and of course the capital city of Boralus. Now, as you can see, the sightlines here are massive, and they really just make use of the increased view distance in Legion. So what does this mean for the gameplay? Well, you're almost always having a fantastic view around you. Not only does that look pretty, but more importantly, it actually works with how you naturally navigate in the real world by using landmarks. This all combines to give a wonderful sense of scale, and it makes the traversal feel very natural. In short, it feels like the opposite to the overcrowded theme park-like design of some of the Legion zones and sub-areas. It is basically one massive immersive continent, and then the zones themselves still manage to have a good variety of visuals and themes, but not so much so as they kind of break cohesion. In my view, it's actually one of the best bits of outdoor world design in World of Warcraft. Let's move on to Zandalar. So it does have a more Legion-like feel in terms of its layout, and the benefit here is that we get 3 very different aesthetics, but it does end up feeling a little bit more theme parky than Kul Tiras does, and therefore in some ways it's not really as believable as a place, which for me makes it a bit less immersive overall. That said, Nazmir is an absolutely wonderful zone. It really has a surprising amount of visual variation and some amazing set pieces. The zone that drags things down is Zuldazar. Now, as much as the capital city itself is mightily impressive, the rest of the zone does just feel like a series of quest hubs that are interconnected by flight paths and roads. It also doesn't have much visual variation either, and it does suffer from having 1 or 2 great set pieces that far outshine the rest of the zone. That said, it has a fantastic story, which I'll talk about later. So overall, basically, Kul Tiras is fantastic when it comes down to its gameplay because of how effective its overall world design is. Rather than making small condensed gameplay areas or set pieces, they instead seem to have focused more on making one big immersive world. Zandalar probably does have some more impressive set pieces that would really shine better in a trailer, but from actually going through the gameplay, I think on average it's a bit below Kul Tiras. But we need to talk about questing and story. This is where the Alliance versus Horde debate really sparks up, or at least it seems to have since Preach's video covering the quest experience. Now, as you can probably tell, I think we have to judge the quality of the zones separately from the quests and the storyline. I think Kul Tiras is undoubtedly the better designed continent overall, but when you get into the actual questing, and the stories and all that stuff, things are a little bit different. Zandalar primarily focuses on a very immediate threat. There is one large crisis going on in that continent, and it's tied into the first raid of the expansion. That means there's a very tangible sense of immediacy to the questing. Basically, everything that you do feels very driven and very purposeful. You're dealing with a conspiracy, which leads to some pretty high-stakes events, and this really just comes through in the quests. The story is clear to the point where players who don't read the the quest text, they're still going to get a lot out of it through the cutscenes, the cinematics, and the NPC dialogue. Basically, it's all hype as hell. It's very bombastic, it's direct in your face, and it's meant to be thrilling and exciting. It's then combined with some really great side quests, especially in Nazmir, and they really serve to flesh out the zone. So, it's a great story. There's a lot of political intrigue, lots of action, lots of lore, and some lovely dark tones. Basically, everyone will enjoy Zandalar based on what I've played of it, in my view. Culturas is a bit different. First, they do a good job of introducing some local characters who seem to be quite charismatic, and then you're instantly thrust into a nice bit of political intrigue. And actually, it's kind of effective right off the bat. If you were to go through, I'd say, the main story of Tiragard Sound, you would have a great time. The story's great, actually. It's got some fun themes, some good content. It's maybe a little bit below the hype levels of Zandalar, but, it's pretty good. But here's the key difference. You'll see a lot of side quests. Sometimes they focus a bit more on world building than immediate threats, and some of them, frankly, do just feel a bit tacked on. There's then also the big estate. Now, this serves as a fun diversion to build out Kultiran society. It gives you some quests that are fun, and sometimes, so that's great, but then sometimes you just get a bunch of random kill quests as a bunch of side quests. So basically, Kulturas might be my favorite continent, but narratively it does feel a bit more uneven. I suppose if I'm to bring up Drustvar, you see a similar setup. It actually starts out kind of slow and spread out with a mix of some side quests that are great, but also some that are, just killing stuff. Now, you do have some memorable quest lines, like, say, the Witch Trial, and they do develop into a more interesting storyline by the time you get to the second half of the zone. In both cases, the quest flow itself is fine. So, if you're in your second character and you just want to crush your way through the continent, you know what? Actually, you might even prefer Kulturas because of the level design and the world design, but basically, Zandalar certainly does give the strongest first impression in terms of its narrative. It's just more hype. Next up, we've got Stormsong Valley, so it's a bit of an interesting one. The first half of this zone is great. It's really tightly focused, and you've got kind of a smaller cast of characters that they're all just pretty well executed. So you've got one character who you sort of know from all of the other zones. She goes along with you, and you meet some new characters there, and it's just got this, I suppose, it's a linear storyline, but what's good about that is it tells a story. It's, it has set pieces. It is, overall, I would say, quite well polished and executed. It feels like one of the stronger sequences of, say, Shadow Moon Valley in Warlords of Draenor. So that's really strong, and plot-wise, it, of course, no spoilers, but, it's dealing with a decently immediate threat. You know about the Sea Priests, and, if you're listening to the Whispers of the Seas in World of Warcraft, it pretty much means you're in for a bit of bother. So it starts off with this really, really strong first half that I enjoyed a hell of a lot. The weird thing is you move into the second half of the zone, and it just sort of, I guess it's weird. You have this sort of weird climax in the middle, right, where you deal with the first sort of major plot line, and then you do a bit of the Horde, some Quillboars, and some Naga, but it all just sort of, it feels like it's all a bit random after you deal with the main storyline and the bit of Stormsong Valley that they really cared about. So I was actually quite confused that the main story involving the Sea Priests and all of that stuff, I'm really surprised that it wasn't longer and a bit more fleshed out, because what they had was great, and whenever they just sort of randomly throw in Quillboar for you to kill, it does feel like a little bit of a diversion. So if I was to compare to the other Alliance zones, I'd say that if it had have maintained the pace of its first half, it would have been the best Alliance zone, but I'd say they're pretty much all on par, because while this does have a really, really strong start, it does unfortunately taper off. And then of course the layout and all of that stuff with the zone is pretty much in line with most of my thoughts on Kulturas, so it's pretty strong. And all of this does bring up a little bit of I suppose, a criticism. It all does scream of the World of Warcraft Legion problem, where because you can do any leveling zone in any order, it means that there are no plot lines which go from zone to zone to zone. So you can't have a character be introduced in Zone A and then, develop in Zone A and maybe have the conclusion of their plot line be in Zone B. That's impossible with the way that Blizzard constructs zones now, and that does mean both for Zandalar and for Kulturas that it does feel kind of disconnected. Now, it's not as bad as it felt with Legion, in my view, but I still do think that it's a bit of a fundamental storytelling problem that Blizzard have. I suppose it's the sort of thing, you give players the freedom to go to any zone, and the price that you pay for that is that you cannot tell a sort of a clear, straightforward story. Now, I do have one final note here. I suspect that the release of Vol'dun will kind of even things out, to be honest. So, yeah, I don't think that there's really going to be much overall to the kind of faction debate. It should pretty much be balanced when I think about what I've read of the data mined quests. But again, we'll have to wait and see in that one. Now, it's also worth mentioning that both sides get a taste of the other faction's zone sort of themes through a short quest line. So, as an example, Alliance players get a pretty cool introduction to all the Blood God stuff in Nazmir, and this means that you should get a pretty varied feeling leveling experience with, basically just the other side's continent can kind of break up the flow and the pace. Finally, it is really important to say that right now there's no voice acting, there's very little music, there's no cinematics, barely any cutscenes, a whole bunch of them are flat out unimplemented. These things are all going to have a massive impact on how all of this feels to play, but I suppose what we can comment on though is the core story, the quest design, and the quest layout. So generally in terms of the layout, you see you've got your main quest line to follow, and while you're following it, you'll run into a bunch of side quests. It's pretty much what you've came to expect. I've had no problems with any of these layouts that have stood out to me, which is likely a good thing. I think you only really notice a layout if it's bad. So overall, the questing does get a thumbs up. Zandalar is probably edging out Kulturas in terms of its questing, but I think Kulturas is edging out Zandalar in terms of the overall world design. Plus, some of the Kulturas stuff is maybe a little bit less on the nose, so if you are big into reading the quest text, then maybe things will be a bit more even for you. Next, though, it's time to talk about island explorations, and I've done a full video on these, so I'm going to keep this short. Playing the test version has convinced me that there is a lot of potential with this system. I was pleasantly surprised by how effective the layout variation and the enemy teams were in terms of just keeping the runs enjoyable, and bear in mind, we've only tested one island, and it seems like there is a bunch of islands. Now, Blizzard recently said that they think the version we tested would be a good spot for heroic difficulty. I completely disagree. The version I did was a bloody cakewalk. It should be normal difficulty. For heroic, I would like to see the same relative difficulty in terms of numbers, but with more aggressive AI. And then for mythic, I really think it should be mythic. Victory shouldn't be guaranteed, it should be properly bloody hard. This feature will only have legs if they tune it so that it's difficult enough for the variations in enemy team and map layout to actually impact your decision making. So this is the potential for a wonderful system, but they also have the potential to blow it, unless maybe 8.1 brings a Mythic Plus version of these, which, when you actually think about it, Mythic Plus would really suit the semi-random nature of these pretty damn well. Next, class changes. Broadly, it's too early to make sweeping judgments about class changes in this expansion, but I guess these are my thoughts after testing most of the specs that have had substantive changes. So some specs, especially the Ret Paladin, are just flat out better in my view right now. They just play really slowly because of the gear level on the PTR. Now, I have both hopes and reservations for some of the Hunter specs. I've really enjoyed the new Demonology Warlock. And then I suppose there's specs like Arms, which have received tweaks that I really have enjoyed. Now, one broad concern as I make this video right now is the change to GCDs. With basically many cooldowns, they're going to be on the GCD, and I would not be surprised if they revert to this, to be honest. From playing with the changes, basically, some specs are hit more than others, so it's maybe not great if you're a Fury Warrior. It means that cooldown stacking is a little bit more laborious, especially if you've got unused trinkets. Now, I agree with Blizzard's decision, or, thinking that, say, just macroing all your burst, that's boring, right? And that seeing the animations does make sense in terms of the readability of the game, but to be honest, it really does feel like you've lost something, and there is something about popping all your cooldowns at the same time and just lining everything up and going ham right now. There's something about that that's really fun, and I would worry that some of that will be missed if they carry ahead with these changes. So that's definitely one that I'm going to be monitoring. And I suppose broadly, I don't think it's a good idea right now for me to give a full review of all of the classes at this stage, because we don't have the Heart of Azeroth. It's going to contain a lot of tweaks, and just generally talking about, say, specific class rotation tweaks in a specific video, that makes sense, that's fun, as an example, the Ret Paladin video, but I think it's too early for broad overall opinions. Now, while this isn't a class change, the stat squish, I think that's been super welcome. I've talked about it previously, but to me, it boils down to the numbers are smaller, literally, they're smaller on screen, and they're more useful. The fewer sort of decimal places, the less precision you have, the less statistical noise, which makes it more readable, and I think more gameplay aligned. However, I still think the Blizzard have us increase too much in power over the duration of an expansion, which necessitates a bunch of catch-up and stuff. So I think that in expansion 10, we're probably going to have stat squish number 3. So time for some closing thoughts. Overall, I've really enjoyed my time time on the alpha test. The zones, broadly speaking, have left a stronger impression than the Legion ones, though take that with a little bit of salt. I do think that I have a lower opinion of the Legion zones than the average WoW player. Still though, the zones are really cool. Island explorations, they scream of potential. Just don't make them too easy, Blizzard. The dungeons, well, come on. Modern Blizzard dungeons, that's one of the things they do best. We've only seen a few, but I've no reason to expect a decrease in quality over Legion. Warfronts and Azurite gear, I suppose they're the final pieces of the puzzle. I expect Azurite gear to be better than the Legion systems that it replaces, so legendaries and artifacts, and I expect Warfronts to be a fun gimmick for the first few times, but not really to be a lasting system, if I'm honest, though neither of those opinions really mean that much because the content's not available for testing. So that's my broad thoughts on the Battle for Azeroth Alpha. And a tremendous thank you to everyone over on Patreon who are helping to make the whole channel possible. We've got a video editor on, which has been awesome for the last while and has led to a whole bunch of just way better content than what I used to be able to do on my own. Over on Patreon, there's early access to non-breaking news videos along with vlogs, AMAs, and just general behind the scenes stuff. So you can check out the Patreon with the link down in the description, and a tremendous thank you to all of them for really helping out the channel. And a massive thank you to you for watching this video. And with that, I will see you next time.